Thanks, sorry. But yeah, we have kind of a loose theme of universal design for learning this year, looking at how we can leverage Canvas towards some common, I would say, institutional goals around our efforts for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So seeing as universal design is kind of a lens through which we can start thinking about being inclusive and then sharing strategies for how we can leverage Canvas towards that end. So we have a few presenters lined up through fall that will be kind of addressing areas on that topic. We have our first presenter today, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But then if you at your campus or know of somebody doing something with Canvas that would fit into that, we would love to have more presenters lined up for the spring. So we'll formalize a process for getting that done. But I know I may be calling on Kim and Jeff. You guys are doing stuff around that right now. So, all right. Mm-hmm. So do we have anybody new to the Canvas SIG? That
go ahead and just throw it in the chat or raise your hand or
hi, yeah.
On your camera.
Oh, hi, Pam. Pam's saying she's new. Okay, great.
Sweet.
All right. Well, in the interest of time, I do want to introduce our speaker today. Kim actually was able to get this contact started for us, so thank you very much. And today we have Doug Holton, who's the Director of Teaching and Learning at Florida Poly, and he's going to be presenting on evidence-based teaching strategies within Canvas. Before we get started, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, and Michael and I will keep track and get those out there. And I think without further ado, Doug, if you want to share your screen.
Sure. Get to that real quick. And hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, we're good. Thank you.
Awesome. And again, so I can go ahead and start. Is that good? All right. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm really I've been a huge fan of the work y'all have been doing out in California, especially with relation to online courses and Canvas. I've been, and if I have time later, I'll show you, for example, this course template that we created that was largely inspired by the Humboldt State template, for example. So again, I'm really honored to be here. So this material is based on work I did at Valencia College previously, and I've been collaborating with some colleagues who are still there. And we'll be presenting this also at the OLC conference in a couple months here in Orlando. I'm now at Florida Poly, which is a STEM university, sort of like Cal Poly, but we're a lot smaller and newer. So we're just getting started. We actually, right now, don't even have online courses yet. We're going to get started in that the next year. So I've been using Canvas since 2011 at Utah State University, and now been at 3 schools that have made the transition from Blackboard to Canvas. So that's been exciting. The inspiration for this topic was I was at Embry-Riddle University too, an aviation and STEM university, and we had a lot of problems, struggles with helping students succeed, especially in the gateway courses like the math and physics and so on. And so we started looking into strategies to help improve their success and reduce equity gaps. And then I made the transition to Valencia College, where we focused on online and also Canvas. And that's what led off to this, was I was trying to see what kind of strategies would help improve student success and reduce equity gaps in online courses. So I'll go ahead and get started. We may have Jo Smith join us a little later. I'm not sure about that. She has contributed some slides to this. And I guess my keyboard isn't working. Okay. So again, another motivation for this too is now this is very widespread that different professional organizations out there, like the biology, physics, and so on, have been calling for adopting evidence-based teaching strategies. And those are strategies where there's research evidence usually that they can improve student success, maybe reduce equity gaps, or improve student attitudes, or their self-efficacy or confidence, or their sense of belonging, any kind of positive impacts like this. But we've run into a lot of challenges trying to adopt these, which I can kind of summarize real quickly, some of them. One is that I've learned a lot about a lot of different evidence-based strategies at Embry-Riddle, but most of them are designed for face-to-face classes. Some of these you may have heard of or even used in your classes, like peer instruction or flipping the classroom. team-based learning and think, pair, share. There's and technologies like Kahoot and Poll Everywhere. Those all are great strategies and technologies that have shown positive impacts for students, but sometimes it's hard to see how they might translate to an online course, especially, of course, asynchronous courses. And then the other big hurdle is that most instructors and faculty don't have time, to kind of keep up with these new strategies or the research on them. And even when you do keep up, it's when you're reading a journal article, for example, it's not always clear, how do I translate this into, something concrete in my own class. So, and then one other challenge is I've been involved in, my background is educational research, especially STEM research. And 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, we would test out some new strategy or technology and measure student learning from pre to post, and if it went up significantly, and especially if it was higher than a comparison group, we were all happy, and we'd present about it or publish it, and then we'd move on to the next thing. But of course the newer thing now that we have begun to realize, especially in the past 10 years, is that you need to look at the subgroups of students too. It's usually teaching strategies or technologies don't benefit all students the same way. So one common result that we would see back in the day was something like this left graph. This is a fake graph, but this is one where, say, you separate students by their pretest scores into like high achieving or low achieving, or you can do quartiles, and you'd see in the results that some technology or strategy only benefited the high achieving students. Sometimes this would happen with things like maybe lecture capture or things like that. Lecture capture, the students who tend to go back and review the class recordings tended to be the higher achieving students, or sometimes international students or students for whom English was not their first language. But then the other students, it didn't seem to have much impact at all. So we start now to look at subgroups, gender and ethnicity and so on, to see, can we improve either all the students or at least some subgroups who we want to improve and reduce equity gaps. So the opposite of this left graph is a result that I'll talk more about in a little bit. This is an intervention where faculty met with or emailed a special message to their students who did poorly on their first exam. And based on that one short little intervention, their scores went up greatly, and it virtually reduced the gaps between high achieving and low achieving students by the second exam. So we'll talk about that a little bit more with nudges. And there was an article published a couple of years ago that actually identified 18 different barriers to adopting these evidence-based teaching practices. I won't go into them all, but I did a presentation earlier in the year on one barrier, was student resistance. One thing I usually recommend to faculty is whenever you're trying something out of the ordinary, that is not the traditional way of teaching, online or face-to-face, you might want to anticipate potential student resistance because they may not be expecting it. So I did a presentation about some different strategies about how to anticipate and reduce student resistance. If you click this link, if you go to the slides, you can see that. And I forgot to mention on the first slide, on the bottom here is a short link, bit.ly/ I need to stop moving my mouse so it'll go away. bit.ly/EBT Canvas is a short link to these Google Slides in case you want to follow any of these links or dive into some of the data or anything like that. If that
I've gone ahead and drop that into the chat too, so everybody can look at it.
Thanks.
We've got one question.
Yeah.
You have a second? Okay, so is it Tanya?
Tanya, yeah.
Okay, great. I was wanting to know, how do you organize your sub-accounts to help with data on evidence-based teaching?
That I'm not the best person to ask for that, because I only for the first time at this school have administrative access, but we have another Canvas administrator who's been managing our sub accounts and so on. So I'm afraid I don't have a great answer to that. They've only just switched to Canvas like in about a year ago too, and that was one area that I haven't. I've been using Canvas since 2011, but that's actually one area where I'm not as familiar as the administration side. I'm only just now diving into how to access outcome reports and things like that, and sub accounts and so on.
So perhaps we can do some digging in and get back with a response to.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Yeah, if any of you have an answer to that too, feel free to share in the chat. I was actually going to ask you in just a second now this challenge that I'm talking about, where you have students who are maybe struggling in their classes, or you see equity gaps in different classes. In this, I believe this next class, I was going to go ahead and ask you if you already have some strategies that you've used to help improve student success or reduce equity gaps. I'd love it if you feel comfortable sharing it in the chat or whatever, and maybe we can sort of go through them in a few minutes. So if you already have some ideas of strategies you use to tackle some problem with student success or equity gaps, please feel free to share in the chat. Maybe I can go ahead and talk about one strategy in just a second, and then we can come back to the chat and see what people have shared. But what I'm looking for, what I was basically targeting in this resource that I'm sharing here today is strategies that work online courses too, not just face-to-face. I was looking for strategies that are kind of brief and easier to implement. They don't require redesigning your whole course. And then, like I mentioned before, I was looking for strategies that not just improve student success in average, but also reduce equity gaps or achievement gaps and things like that. So we'll come back to if anyone shares any strategies you want to share, research-based or not, really, anything, that'd be great to hear from. But I'll go ahead and start enlisting through some strategy. I'll kind of show an example of the strategy and then briefly show some of the research on the impact that it can potentially have with your students. So this one is probably my favorite, and a lot of these strategies are not new, and this one has probably been around since as long as marketing and advertising has been around. It's the student testimonial technique. It's just only recently I've come across some research on how this technique can improve student success and reduce equity gaps. This is basically where you just try to compile and share testimonials of perhaps former students of yours, share them with your current students, like at the beginning of the course, to kind of help students try to better understand what they need to do to succeed in the course, maybe help reduce some of their anxiety or stress about the course perhaps, and also hear from students that they can relate to, This is one example of video testimonials from a former colleague of mine, Carrie Jordan. As part of her dissertation, she compiled some video testimonials for freshmen to watch about their engineering program. Another example I learned about at last year's OLC Accelerate conference from the University of Houston. They call it a realistic job preview rather than a student testimonial, but it's a video. I'm not going to play these videos because I'm not sure if the sound will work well, but you can, again, play these on your own. This is a video that helps students try to better understand how to succeed in online courses, try to target some misconceptions some incoming students may have about online courses, like some may feel that online courses are easier than face-to-face and things like that. And again, if some of you have used this technique yourself, again, feel free to share in the chat. I'll check it in a minute. I did want to mention though, it doesn't have to be video testimonials. This is one that Alex Penn, another colleague of mine who's will be presenting together at OLC. She created some other video testimonials to also help students better prepare for online courses. But you can do text testimonials too. Here's one that I've used before in a college success course I taught, where at the end of the college success course, I asked students who are mostly freshmen to write a letter to next year's freshmen just with advice that they might give to next year's freshmen based on all that they've learned and all that they've experienced in their first semester at college. And so, of course, at the beginning of the semester, I have the freshmen read the previous freshman letters, and I'm surprised how thoughtful and in depth the students go. And I asked them to say what major they were too, and other information like that, so they can maybe find some students who are in the same major as them and can relate to more. This is another text testimonial from a MOOC. This is from a study that studied the impact of the student testimonial technique. So that's why I wanted to include it. But it was the same kind of thing you might expect, where students were talking about worries they had about online courses at the beginning, but things they did to try to better succeed in the course. So if you do want to try this technique, or if you have been trying it, here are a few tips on using it though, is that I recommend providing some guidance when you ask students to create testimonials, some guidance on what you want them to include in the testimonial, like if you want them to mention their major or something like that. If you have the option, if you can provide a variety of student testimonials, that'd be nice too, because we have a variety of students, and if they can might relate more to certain students who are similar to them. And then the last lesson that we've learned from that study that I'm about to show you too is that if at the beginning of the semester, just showing that video or showing that text testimonials, that's usually not enough. I don't know about you all, but I usually assume that if something's optional, most students won't do it. So it's usually a good idea to have some kind of activity that where students reflect on or sort of process that testimonial, like it might be an assignment in Canvas, or a survey, a graded survey or not, or an online discussion. This is an example of a writing response activity from that MOOC study. And I know I'm going really fast. I'm not going to dive too much into the weeds in this, since the slides are all here if you want to dive into them more. But these are just some sample responses to that writing activity from that article. And then here's some of the data from that article. This was a MOOC that was given to students around the whole world. So it had students from countries all over the world. And it showed that this intervention, the social belonging intervention, for example, in the middle, particularly benefited students from less developed countries, like third world countries or so on. I think I may have some other data. Yeah, this is another study that used this technique, and it showed benefits in particular for African American students. That's these dark bars in the different graphs show greater improvement in their grades and so on. So again, this is one that can help reduce, or in some cases potentially eliminate, equity gaps in certain courses. When you first try some of these strategies, they may not work well, but again, if you just try to keep up with it and refine it, hopefully you can see some success with it. And before I go into the next one, again, I just wanted to check the chat. Did you have any questions or examples of techniques that you've been using in your class to help improve student success or reduce these equity gaps?
Yeah, it looks like Kim and Pam threw some stuff in there. Kim, Pam, do either of you guys want to speak to the examples that you guys are using?
Sure, I'm happy to. And sorry, I apologize in advance if any of you have already heard my little spiel on this sort of activity I've been doing, but I've been doing it for a couple years in my blended course, and I'm using VoiceThread. It's not about VoiceThread. I'm not really studying VoiceThread. It's about how VoiceThread is supporting the pedagogy. And really what I'm looking at is creating a sense of belonging. So this is a first year student course. So this is particularly in the fall. It's their first time coming to college. Sometimes I get some transfer students, so it's also their first time. And so I've been using it for some time, but I've never formally studied it. I think students really like it. They talk about it throughout the course because it happens during the first week, but I don't really know. So now I'm looking at it. I'm actually using student artifacts on the reflections of participating in the activity. So they give their voice. They basically share the story behind their name. How did they get their name?
Oh, cool.
And then they discuss with each other, respond, and things like that. And they learn to kind of get to know each other more. But anyways, and then they're doing a reflection later in the course in relation to their speeches that they give that will reflect back to that. I'm also doing a pre and post. So I did a pre before they participated, and then I'll have a post. But the idea is that I'm going to look at those sort of the qualitative data around that, and then compare that to the equity gap in my grade distribution that I have in the course. So I don't have an overall equity gap in my course. All my students are successful across various marginalized groups. But what I did notice when I requested data distribution across their final grades, that most of my students of color were in the B's and C's as compared to white students were in the A's. So I'm looking at that.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and I don't know if you're using this or not, but there are some instruments out there that might help with sort of measuring sense of belonging, so you can see if there are changes. I was just looking for, there's a well-known book on this topic. Oh, that's not it. Oh boy, I guess I forgot the title. Oh, there it is, College Students' Sense of Belonging, by Terrell Strayhorn from Ohio State. If you haven't seen this book, or look up his work, I believe his center at Ohio State might have some instruments that are useful too. And for almost any of these things we're trying to improve in students, like self-efficacy and so on, a lot of times you can find a nice little assessment instrument that you might use pre and post, or just post. So
thank you.
Mm-hmm. And were there others too at things they'd like to share? I don't know if Michael, if you can.
Oh,
sorry,
I don't know if you want to or not.
I think I just put in the chat just that we have a new inclusive design workshop for faculty that we kind of use the Universal Design for Learning framework, but also other research from diversity and equity and inclusion research. And especially in the online environment or things that you're posting to the learning management system, that you're thinking about inclusive language in the language you're using online, as well as representation, the kinds of images you're choosing, the kinds of research examples or other types of examples you might be using in your course, to make sure you're looking at beyond what has been traditionally used in higher education and using more diverse examples so people see themselves more and feel more represented. So, you know, knowing that that first initial sense of welcome or belonging in the classroom can help with motivation in learning.
No, that's awesome. And forgive me if, again, I know y'all have been doing these kind of sessions for a while, and you guys are kind of, California is sort of in the lead on a lot of this stuff, but I didn't know if y'all have heard of the Peralta equity rubric. The online equity rubric is another great resource to kind of check over your online course to see if what kind of strategies you're doing to help improve equity in your course. They have a nice rubric that might supplement your existing rubric, course design rubric, if that's helpful too. So any other things people like to share about strategies they use, or else I can go on to describe some more?
Ellen, Suzanne was just mentioning in the chat about the Peralta rubric.
Oh,
so
okay. Oh, there you go.
And then I found the link. So the link now to the rubrics in the chat as well. So thank you, Suzanne,
sweet.
for bringing that up.
Yeah. Again, we're just in the process of getting our own online courses off the ground, and I'm hoping to incorporate some of their work and the quality standards we use as well. Just to show some other strategies, try to go through, and again, a lot of these are not new and you may have already heard of them. For example, perhaps you've heard of Claude Steele's work, Whistling Vivaldi, and so on. Some of this is derived from his work. These are values affirmation and goal setting are examples of some quick little surveys that sometimes only take like 10 minutes, but it's been amazing to see that the impact that it can have, even like a semester or a year later. And these work in online courses too, which is why I included them. They're quick to implement and they work in online. This is an example of a values affirmation survey, and I have, I forgot to mention this too, but I have examples of all these in a Canvas course that is linked to from the first slide too. This is what it looks like at the moment. I have examples already pre-built, like here's a values affirmation survey, a goal setting survey, and these are all in Commons too. So if you search Commons, let me see if I can get this, for evidence-based teaching, you'll see this whole course resource that I've shared there. It's there twice because once I shared it from Valencia and now from Florida Poly. They're both very similar, but the first one is the newest one in case you want. So this is just a quick little survey where you ask students to identify 2 or 3 values that are important to them, like their sense of humor or creativity and so on. And then you ask them to say, how do these values, or how does this course reflect and reinforce your values? And that's pretty much the entire survey. Just a little activity like this helps make that, try to help make that deep connection between what they're learning in the course to things that they value. So that's a big problem in face-to-face or online courses. In some courses, they're like, why am I learning this? You know, I don't see the importance of this, but this at least gets them to kind of reflect and think more deeply about how this might be useful to them. A similar kind of survey is the goal setting example here, where it asks questions like, what is your ideal future? What do you want to do? What are some things that you'd like to learn more about? What are some habits you'd like to improve? And then write about these goals and how you might achieve them in their future. And I guess it just gets students to, again, take that more metacognitive kind of stance, to step out of themselves and reflect on their learning and about what it means to be a student and so on, and think how this connects to their life goals or their values and so on. And again, just a short little survey, quick little activity, but it's shown some amazing results. This is, again, from another MOOC, actually a similar MOOC study where this values affirmation intervention, as shown on the right side of both of these graphs, improved their persistence and completion in an online course. I think I have another study. This graph is, I know, hard to see and hard to understand in a quick presentation like this, but it showed that on the 3rd week of a course, they did this values affirmation intervention. And this black line with the triangles represents African-American students who did the values affirmation, and it shows that the gap between them and other students started to close, and it pretty much was eliminated by later in the weeks in the course. So again, this one little quick survey had some pretty amazing impacts later in the course. And the goal setting one, I only have this one graph. It just shows that it did improve GPA to some extent in students who did it, the goal setting intervention. And some of the reasons why some of these strategies work, and I'm going to tell you about some others too. Some of the strategies involved peers learning from each other. Those are especially the more traditional strategies that tend to work better in face-to-face courses like peer instruction, team-based learning, peer-led team learning, and so on. I try to explain it to faculty that, you know, say you're teaching calculus or whatever it is, it's sometimes for faculty, it may be a decade or 2 decades or whatever since you actually learned that topic. When you give students an opportunity to learn from each other, they get to learn from people who just learned it like a day ago or an hour ago or a week ago. So they better remember some of the mistakes they made or misconceptions or so on. And then the other, some other theories for why these other strategies work is because of like the values affirmation and so on helps them sort of vaccinate them against negative stereotypes or help them confront and better cope with potential issues like stress or a lack of confidence. Or another intervention that I'm not describing here, but probably most of you have heard about it, is growth mindset. There's a 30-minute module that an organization has made that students can do online to help develop their growth mindset. And that's also shown some great impacts. That's where students learn that their intelligence is not some fixed thing, and it's not about looking smart or being smart or trying to avoid failure, trying to cope better with failure, to see it as a stepping stone and something to learn from. So again, if you all have any questions or examples of techniques like that too you've used, let me know. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and share a few more strategies. Let me know though if there are any questions. This one, again, probably some of you maybe have heard about too, because it's been well studied at many universities across the country, called transparent assignments. This is also available in that Canvas space. I have a template with a transparent assignment template in this Canvas space. All this involves is where you try to help faculty redesign their assignments to be more transparent, essentially trying to be more clear to students on why are we doing this assignment, what do you need to do to complete this assignment, and what are the criteria that will be used to, that you need to succeed in this assignment. And it sounds like it's common sense, but the full template has more details, but just using this template has shown, again, some tremendous positive impacts. For the criteria for success, for example, sometimes they recommend if you can share specific examples of previous work to students so they can get a more concrete idea of what, you know, good work looks like. Have any of you had experience with transparent assignments before? Because I know it's been widely spread, but maybe not as widely as it should be. I don't know. Well, just let me know. So as the lady who created this technique and has researched it widely with some large grants from the Institute for Educational Sciences and so on, has found that when faculty redesign their assignments to use this transparency template, it's shown to improve student success, their academic confidence, their sense of belonging, and the mastery of the kinds of soft skills, sometimes people call it, that employers value. Creativity, communication, and so on. I do have, I'll show one specific example just to, because again, just to be more transparent, I learn better from concrete examples myself. This is a page that has some various examples in different disciplines where they took an assignment and redesigned it to be more transparent. This, and again, I apologize if it's hard to read, but this is just an assignment in an intro science class where students had to analyze a scientific poster. In the original version, it just gave them a bunch of questions for them to answer. When they redesigned this assignment, they started with instead, and let me scroll over, the purpose, like why are we even doing this assignment? Sort of explain to them why they're doing it, how it'll help them when they create their own scientific poster later in the semester and so on. Then it laid out specifically the tasks they need to do when they're analyzing the posters. And then it doesn't, in this case, it's maybe not the best example of the criteria section, but it usually, again, if you can show some examples or something like that, that would help there. But feel free to check out that page to see if there's examples closer to your own disciplines, if they're helpful, like psychology or biology. And this one also showed that it didn't just help all students. This is a graph where it showed in the green bars how to improve the employer-valued skills, academic confidence, and sense of belonging in all students, but it also had even greater benefits for first-generation students, or here's underrepresented students, and then low SES students. So again, that's what I'm really looking for, is stuff that not only improves the success of all students on average, but hopefully reduces or even can eliminate some of those equity or achievement gaps. And one other thing to mention while I'm going through this, I'm going to ask you at the end if, again, think about any one of these strategies you see and think how you might apply it in your own class. Maybe pick one that kind of jumps out at you, maybe you're most interested in. And maybe at the end, I hope we have a little time to talk about how any that you might want to apply in your own class. Since I'm getting shorter on time, I'll kind of more quickly summarize some of these other ones. This is another strategy you may have heard of, nudges. This is when you, and I don't see Joe here, so I'll go ahead and do it myself. But this is when you send personalized messages to students to help improve their success, or maybe try to influence their behaviors sometimes. Sometimes it's non-course related stuff, like trying to make sure they remember to fill out their financial aid application or things like that. But you can do it in a class and in Canvas too. There's different types of nudging, like giving them feedback on things like that, or again, like I said, reminding them of certain things to do. I did want to mention, before I show you how you can do it in Canvas some different ways, Canvas is working on a special new nudge tool. They call it Canvas X, like experimental. I haven't heard yet when or if it will be released, but this is a tool that, from what I understand, will do things like, say a student hasn't turned in an assignment yet and it's due the very next day, this can automatically send them a reminder. Until we get that tool, you can kind of manually do that, like with this Message Students Who feature. I'm sure probably many of you have seen this. You can go into the gradebook, and I assume you're all in the new gradebook now in Canvas. And if you hover over one of your assignment columns and click the 3 vertical dots, or what we call it has different names like the snowman or the kebab. We have a bunch of different nicknames for those 3 vertical dots, and choose Message Students Who, and you can send a special personalized message to say the students who haven't submitted something yet or scored not so well on an assignment or a quiz or something like that. Of course, you can also send personalized messages via the inbox tool or the announcements. And again, if any of you have any examples of how you've used strategies like this or any questions, let me know. So this is from a study, though, where students who did not so well on their first exam, faculty sent a personalized email to those students, or they asked those students to come meet with them one-on-one. This is an example. I'm not going to read through it, and I know that text is hard to read anyways, but an example of the email message that they sent out after the exam scores came out. It gave them some advice about their learning goals, about the strategies that they use for studying, about the resources available to them. And again, I know this is totally unreadable, but this is just 2 resources I'm a big fan of. This is stuff I share with my faculty if they are meeting with a student who maybe is struggling. I'm actually doing a workshop this Friday on how to support struggling students. And if it comes up that maybe their study skills are maybe not very effective, or their time management, there's this great handout from Barbara Oakley that lists some different good studying tips. On the back side of that handout is some bad study tips. So I like the contrast there. And probably my favorite productivity tip that I teach in my college success course is Pomodoro. If you haven't heard of that, that's where you ask students to just take their writing paper they're trying to do or their homework and just try to put it into bite-sized chunks, like 25 minutes at a time or 15 minutes at a time. So again, maybe some of you have heard of these already. But this is the results. Again, it was just amazing to me when I saw this study a few years back, 2012, I think it was, came out of the University of Colorado. Based on this short little meeting with students, or even just an email to students, they showed tremendous improvement in the student performance from the first exam to the second exam. So that's what I'm trying to emphasize to my faculty now. Even just a simple little personalized email can make the difference. And I've heard this time and time again from students. So again, if you have strategies too you've used to help students turn it around, please let us know in the chat. So, just a couple more strategies since I don't have time to, there's tons out there, but this is one I'm a huge fan of too. I'm actually kind of exhausted right now because I've surveyed about 900 students in the past week with this service that I call midterm student feedback. I mean, others have called it that too, but that's the name I pick. Actually, this is a technique that has dozens of names. I did a presentation on this about 3 or 4 years ago. So you may have already heard of some of these other names instead, like small group instructional diagnosis. That's probably the oldest name for it. Or keep doing, quit doing, start doing, and other names like this. It's basically where you just basically survey your students earlier in the semester, maybe like I'm doing mine right around now for my university, like the 4th or 6th week, and just try to get feedback from students, like how are things going? Is there anything you'd like me to change in the course? Anything we can do to improve the course? What's going well in the course, and so on. So there's different ways to do this. Again, traditionally it's been meant for face-to-face courses, but it can be done online too. You can use an anonymous Canvas survey using a graded survey or ungraded. I do recommend making it anonymous when you edit the settings to hopefully make them more open to and forthright in their feedback to you. Ideally, what you could, if possible, if you can have a third party do the survey, or you can even use the same end of course survey tool that you use for midterm student feedback surveys or mid-semester surveys. Some of the questions, I'll skip this. There's a lot of problems with just using the end of course surveys like bias and so on. But some of the questions you might ask in the survey, in a mid-semester survey, might be things just basically like, what do you like about the course so far? What do you think needs improvement? The questions we're using right now are these middle ones. One other question that we liked, I'm not using it right now, is on this next slide, where we add a little question about what can you as the student do to improve your learning in this course, just to help remind students that, hey, your success in this course is not just based on what the teacher does, but it's just as equally based on what you do too. So again, if any of you have used this technique before or have thoughts or opinions about it, feel free to share. But again, the research there's been 40 years of research on this technique, and it's shown that it's helped improve your end of course evaluations. So that's always a nice selling point, especially to new faculty who are really worried about, their course evaluations. It helps improve student satisfaction, but also it can help improve student learning. It's a really popular technique. Like I said, I've surveyed about 60 classes just in the past week, almost 1,000 students so far. And everyone loves it. The students love it because they get a voice in the class. The faculty love it because, again, they get that early feedback so they can make tweaks to the course. And it's all confidential, so they don't have to worry about stress about, negative comments. And I, as a faculty developer, like it because I get all this insight into what's going on in the classes at the university. So I can help target future workshops or things like that to address common issues. This is from one study that showed the large benefits to, for example, end of course evaluations, but it can actually improve student learning too, especially if you can collaborate with an instructional specialist or a faculty developer or instructional designer who can take that feedback from the students and help summarize it and translate it into evidence-based teaching techniques to help address it. If a faculty member hears, you're talking too fast or something like that, I can suggest maybe some evidence-based techniques. One evidence-based technique that's like the simplest one there is called the pause procedure. Just every 10 minutes or so, just pause, take a minute break, a 2-minute break, let students catch up on their notes or, ask questions and so on. And even that's like one of the simplest techniques you can do. And even that is shown it improves student learning and success. This last one, I don't have graphs or research on its impact, but when I started at Valencia College and we focused on online, I was, again, looking for strategies that can help improve student success. And the discussion boards is always the big one. This one, I don't have as clear-cut evidence-based strategies, but I found some great resources that, again, if you want to look at these slides, you can dive into them more deeply. There's a great article from the folks at the University of Central Florida about strategies for creating a community of inquiry in online discussions, and they talk about the discussion protocol technique. Show this other example is a tuning protocol where it helps structure and better guide the discussion so you can have richer and more in-depth discussions. Again, it's a little bit too much for me to describe in this short presentation. Another example that was kind of cool, I ran across a research article on a technique called thematic analysis. One big problem with discussion boards is students will post and maybe even reply to another student. You can require, you know, 1 reply, 2 replies, whatever you do, but then you kind of move on and it's kind of forgotten, right? So this person, Stearns, added a second assignment to go along with the discussion where students were asked to revisit and look through the discussion board post and identify 3 themes in all the discussion posts. So it asked them to, again, look at all the posts and sort of more deeply think about it, and asked them to, the students to share examples of each of the 3 themes they identified. So I just thought that was a great example of a way to get more value from a traditional discussion activity. And lastly, there are some technologies with discussions, as I think it was Kim who mentioned, for example, using VoiceThread, which is a great tool. There's also, probably many of you have heard of Flipgrid. I became a huge fan of Flipgrid in the past couple of years. It's a video discussion board, especially, for example, in that first week or 2 of an online course, you might ask students to introduce themselves or answer some questions and reply to each other with video. It just really helps improve that presence, that sense of presence that students get, especially in online courses. They see the personality of everyone and so on. So I created some tutorials and linked to some existing tutorials, including, I think, a couple of videos from the person who used to work with you, whose name, Rebecca, was it? No. On how to use Flipgrid and Canvas. She created some great videos to help put students at ease too about the fact of speaking on camera like we're doing here. Is, you know, students sometimes are a little uncomfortable with that, and she kind of helped put them at ease with that. So that was great. Again, I don't have research studies yet to show the impact about this, but it seems very compatible with existing ideas about learning and student success, especially in online courses. So that's pretty much all the techniques I had time for in this session. I wanted to give you all some time to think about, you know, any of these strategies I mentioned or other strategies that you've thought of. Is there one that speaks out to you, and and if so, how would you adopt it to your own course? Would anyone, I don't know if we had time now, if any of you would care to share how you might adopt one of these or another study to your classes? Didn't know if we could.
Definitely, if anyone wants to jump in or share, there's been a lot of great conversation taking place in the chat. So if there's something.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I haven't been able to see it.
No, you've been busy.
And I'm sorry, I usually don't like speaking so much like that, but yeah, if you care to share how you might apply one of these to your class, online or not, it'd be great to see your thoughts on it, or any questions or concerns you have about any of this stuff.
We had one question from Joel show up, and he asked if any themes have emerged from student responses to these surveys about how teachers can support student success that would have not been obvious from an instructor's perspective.
Let's see, not obvious. That makes it a little trickier to answer. There are, one thing I did create too a few years ago was a guidebook to it. If you Google, I actually linked to it earlier in the slide, but if you Google MSF guidebook, at the bottom of this guidebook, I identified some of the common themes that tend to come up. I'm hoping to expand on this with Catherine Cunningham and some of my colleagues we work together on this. What I'm really hoping for is a smart tool, a smarter survey tool to help semi-automate this, because if I could, for example, come up with a list of, say, the top 20 or even 50 issues that students tend to raise when they fill out these midterm student feedback forms, like, again, speaking too fast, or there's not a balance between the difficulty in homework examples and quiz examples, or so on and so on. And so in the survey, I could ask them for their midterm student feedback like usual, but then I thought perhaps if I could show them a list of, say, the top 20 issues that come up in classes, and they could choose which of these issues they think are an issue in this class that they're giving feedback, that could then I could help automate this a bit, where when a report is generated from the survey, if some students are identifying a certain issue, I could go ahead and link them to some pre-written resources on how to tackle that issue. There's a similar, in a similar spirit, there's a website from Carnegie Mellon called Solve a Teaching Problem. If you haven't seen this site, it's amazing. It almost can, if you're a school that doesn't have a faculty developer or something like that, it can help. This one, it's sort of a different type of problem though. You first look through this list of common problems that from an instructor point of view, not a student point of view. That's the difference here. Like say your issue is students are coming late to class or they're not participating in your discussions. You can click on that issue and then it gives you some research-based recommendations for how to address that. I basically want to create a similar resource, but from the student point of view, some of the common issues students bring up and link to how to do that. As to which ones are less obvious to faculty or not, that's a difficult thing to say. A lot of times to me, it depends on the individual faculty, their background knowledge, their philosophy of teaching, their sort of philosophy about the best way to teach and how students learn. If they're in a more traditional mode, for example, sometimes they interpret feedback differently than faculty who may have other theories or beliefs about teaching and learning. That's another key thing in all this that's missing right now too, is it'd be great to match the students' beliefs and their feedback on teaching and learning to the faculty beliefs about teaching and learning. There's some research on that from before about whether you're more teacher-centered or instructor-centered or student-centered or so on. So I'm hoping that's a future project I hope to work on, and I want to do it all out in the open, so I'd love to get input from folks on stuff like that. Sorry, I kind of rambled there a little.
No, thank you very much. So I think there was a question about links to the research, and it looks like it's in the Canvas resource here, links yeah. to the research, correct?
Right. Yeah. There's links in the Google Slides and in the Canvas space.
Yeah, it looks like you've got links to the research that's been cited there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And I need to. I'll be updating it quite a lot in the next 2 months in preparation for the OLC conference. If we did have a little bit more time, just one other thing to ask you all too is I know some of you may work with faculty or even if you don't, you work in a department with other faculty, and this is another thing I hope to especially tackle at the OLC conference is how can we, what are strategies we can use to spread the word about evidence-based teaching strategies or technologies. Just to give a couple of examples, of course, one obvious explicit strategy is doing workshops like this or webinars, but one, and this is where I come back to Humboldt State University, I mentioned before, there's also perhaps implicit or tacit strategies we can try. So this is one example of that, where we created a sort of generic Canvas starter kit at Valencia and at Florida Poly. This is inspired again by Humboldt State, where they had this Canvas resource that's in Canvas Commons, and they can import it to help get a jump start on designing or creating courses. It has a sample homepage that they can edit, has a sample syllabus template, and in the modules, there's a skeleton outline for resources like a sample orientation module. Here's this one's organized by week, so it has some sample resources just to show them the types of things you can put in a week one, in a module, I should say. And so while I and others were creating this, like I have a sample assignment, I thought, if I'm going to show them a sample assignment, why not go ahead and throw in that transparent assignment template right there? So it's sort of course, they may not use it, and that's fine, but at least they get exposed to it more. They don't have to, I don't have to worry about whether they come to a workshop or not, or whether they click on a link in a newsletter. So it maybe can help improve exposure. So again, if you all, any of you have any tips or suggestions or ideas too for how to spread the word more to other faculty, I'd love to hear it too.
Well, thank you. The chat is just raving with thank yous and great resources, and I can't agree more. This is fabulous. I think my head right now is dying to jump in and start clicking and searching. And thanks for sharing. This has been outstanding.
Thank you so much. And I guess I should apologize. I do tend to dump a lot of stuff on people, and because there's so much research out there. But hopefully, again, don't worry about it. You can just take it at a slow pace to digest whatever caught your eye. And again, if you have any other resources you care to share, I'd love it if you would share it with me. I appreciate the opportunity to speak here.
Well, thank you. We'll take all the links from the chat and all of everything you've shared in the presentation. We'll be sure to put it in the community space. And then if anybody has, I know some of you've mentioned in the chat resources that you have, so if you can get them Michael's and my way, we can make kind of a common repository within that.
Please do.
So,
okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or final anythings before we finish up for today? Just lots of thanks and awesomes. And thank you again, Doug. We really appreciate your time and look forward to hopefully seeing more at Accelerate.
Great. Yeah, I look forward to maybe meeting you all. Hopefully see you there. If you're not spending all your time at Disney, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you again. Appreciate it.
We'll be
Thank you everyone for participating.
Thank you. All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye.